Good morning. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first of our autumn events programme, during which we'll be talking all things Greater Manchester. For those who don't know me, I'm Dan Whelan, Senior Reporter for Place Northwest. I'm extremely pleased to be hosting today's event, where we'll be speaking to experts from a broad range of disciplines about what is being done to boost Greater Manchester's growth and what the future of our towns and cities look like. But before we get stuck into that, a reminder of how you can get involved in today's event. So I will be the one stood here with the cue cards asking questions, but you can do that as well. The way you do that is up here. So Slido is our question asking platform. Simply go to sly.do and use the code Manchester, and then you can grill our panellists on the stage here. A quick word for our sponsors too. 6 companies are supporting today's event, and they are JMW Solicitors, LUC, Cllr Fibre, Close Brothers Property Finance, Waits, and Unify. As you know, without sponsors, there are no events, so a huge thank you must go to those 6 companies for their support today. Now, onto the event. As I said, it's fantastic to see so many of you here in the room, some kind of normality, and also some people are watching via the live stream on our virtual event platform, Remo, so welcome to everybody. We've got 2 presentations and 2 panel discussions today, featuring individuals playing key roles in shaping Greater Manchester, from architects to developers to local politicians. You'd be hard-pressed to find a lineup with more expertise than the one we've assembled for you today. Greater Manchester's 10 boroughs span more than 315,000 acres and are home to almost 3 million people. Put like that, the job of moulding, connecting and regenerating Greater Manchester seems a tall order. The Greater Manchester Spatial Framework was supposed to make that easier, but finding consensus has been tricky, to say the least. And while that particular story continues to bemuse and amuse, Greater Manchester's cities, Manchester and Salford, are forging ahead with large-scale developments. But Greater Manchester's towns are determined not to be left behind, pulling the trigger on their own regeneration strategies, balancing impressive ambition with a chronic lack of resources. The controlling councils of these places know that investing huge sums of money into regenerating town centres at a time of uncertainty comes with a healthy dose of risk. But inaction is arguably even riskier. The people on this stage today know better than most how the towns and cities of the future will look and what we need to do to get there. And of course, we must mention the big news of this week, the looming departure of Sir Richard Leese as leader of Manchester City Council. He leaves large shoes to fill, and we'll talk about his legacy and what is required of whomever replaces him in order to push the city forward. With so much to cover, you will no doubt have burning questions, so remember, Slido is there for you to ask them. So without further ado, let's welcome our first speaker, a man whose work can be seen across Manchester, Ian Simpson, co-founder of SimpsonHaugh Architects. Ian, round of applause for Ian.
Thank you, Ben. Wow. We were just saying, when was the last time we did this? And you can actually say it's years ago, when we last sat in a room together. And nobody's wearing face masks at this moment in time, so I hope the ventilation's working. But I'm privileged to be just saying a few words, and it's literally, I've been told I've got 10 to 15 minutes to speak. And I can usually talk with the introduction for that amount of time, but I just want to give you a bit of a feel for some of the things that are going on, which I'm sure you've seen elements of it, particularly in Place Northwest, and images being portrayed about what we're doing and what the city is doing. And I'm only speaking for a very small group of people working with me on this particular area. I think there's lots of really exciting things going on across the city at the moment. in all different areas, and many of you in this room are playing your part. So I'm not taking credit for anything that we're doing, it's the office, but I do think there's an opportunity for us to keep the momentum going. The last few years has been tragic for everybody, really, in terms of the Brexit negotiations and obviously COVID. And now we need to come out of this with a really positive enthusiasm for making change happen. And part of what my practice are involved with is a little group of, it's not that small, but a group of buildings that you can see out of the window, most of them, that I'm referring to as the Southern Arc. Now, what we've got, when I last spoke at this event, I focused particularly on Great Jackson Street, which was an idea coming out of the ground. Things were happening. Now, things have happened, and there are some new buildings that we're involved with which are coming out of the ground as it stands now. But also, there's other images and other buildings on this site that are not on this image. I was trying to do a bit of research this literally last minute this morning, asking people to check areas. And between Great Jackson Street and Trinity Islands, the two sites that we're talking about, there will be created something in the region of 9,000 new homes. Now, if you put that into a context, that's a population the size of Wilmslow. Just think about that. And the other aspect that I wanted to just check on, because I'm really passionate about high density intensification. I love the countryside, and I'm sure many of you do, and we don't want to just send urban sprawl through there. But Wilmslow occupies something like 13.44 square kilometres. Great Jackson Street and Trinity Island will occupy 0.118 kilometre. So in terms of actually the natural resource that we have, which is the earth and the land, it's such a sustainable way forward. And I know there's lots of criticism about glass boxes and all those things, and I'd like to probably during the panel dismiss some of that nonsense that is raised about that. But what's really exciting, I think, is the intensification of our city. What you've got to remember is that Manchester, and I'm talking primarily about the Manchester city centre, when the bomb went off in 1996, there were 400 people living in Manchester, mainly caretakers and some people living on top of the Arndale. Now we're into tens of thousands of people. As I say, that Wilmslow, in that one area itself, is 24,000 people. We've already got 3,500, 4,000 people at Deansgate Square. And people drive everything. They drive amenity, they drive restaurants, they drive hotels, they drive offices, they drive public spaces, we drive health facilities, schools. Without people, nobody's going to do anything, and certainly the City Council will react to that. So if we just look at Deansgate Square, which stands in isolation at the moment, bearing in mind there will be about 23, 24 towers in that area without the work we're doing with the likes of Simon that are further forward adjacent to Beetham Tower. But just in Great Jackson Street, there's an intensity of development that is really urban. But what's also really important when you think about these buildings is that virtually 60%, 60 to 64% of that site ends up as public realm. Not someone's back garden or not privatised space with a fence around it, but real public space that we can start to use, which I'm really excited about. And Rachel and I, because our office is in Knott Mill, we now go to Atomica in Deansgate Square for our coffee and for lunch. But there's other restaurants and other, retail independents primarily starting to open there. That was a car park. It's been a car park and redundant buildings for my lifetime, and probably everybody's lifetime, and certainly in this room. So this is the first step. This was the first place. And again, some interesting data around these sorts of buildings. There's one building called West Tower, which is a rental offer from LNG. There are about 530 people live there. There are 37 different nationalities in that one building. This is Manchester, which, interestingly enough, was voted the third best city in the world by Time magazine yesterday. But play that down a little bit. But just the demographics of what is happening with these buildings, they're not just for young people. Okay, the average age is 31 of the whole of the Deansgate Square development. But there's still 60 children living there in family homes. So it's not just about young people, it's about increasing the population and people downsizing, older people moving in, and families. And ultimately, when that demand starts to change, I think the product, the buildings, will respond accordingly. And they'll change whether they become more three-bedders, more four-bedders, whatever. But right at the heart of this particular space is Deansgate Square. And if people haven't been down there, they should just have a wander down there, because you can connect now from First Street round into Deansgate Square. The River Medlock is at the lowest point within Manchester, so you can actually hear it and see it. Okay, it's covered with bricks, and we'd like the Environmental Agency to do something with that. But there's a watercourse there that has wildlife and extraordinary birds. I mean, you wouldn't think it in the city centre, but you can sit on those benches, and these are just some really poor quality photos one of my architects took yesterday, but because we haven't had it photographed yet. But you can sit there, and the light comes in from all sorts of different ways, and you'd be surprised, even though it's a north-facing public space, how full of daylight that space becomes. And you can hear the water. Natural water, and there isn't anywhere else in Manchester that I know of where you can hear that. As part of that is obviously Crown Street Phase 2, Phase 3. You can see out of the window that the first phase that we're looking at on these images is complete. The second two buildings, the Blade and 360, are coming out of the ground. The superstructure is starting to rise. The massive take-up on the residential. So there's a real desire, because what these buildings are providing now as well is really amazing amenity space. And again, if you go to Deansgate Square, you go into this amazing lobby, and there's a cafe, there's the general store, there's meeting spaces, there's places you can book. It's just something we've never experienced in Manchester before. When we designed Beetham Tower, where I live, it was like, let's make the entrance as small as we can, because it's not net saleable. Now you need amenities, and whilst I'm not showing it, the work we're doing with Simon at Viaducts is going to be an amazing. I mean, it'll just transform the perception of what amenity can provide, working with some existing arches. But at the ground level, we've got public spaces, we've got streets, we've got a new public park that were part of Crown Street that isn't there at the moment. And it's again, as I say, it'll be a linkage, and I'll come on to that in a moment, the desire for that. This is a very poor quality image, but on the right-hand side is a new 3-form primary school. It's being built as part of this development together with a health centre. So the infrastructure is starting to catch up. It isn't anywhere near yet, but as I say, we need the people, and that will drive the response in terms of that. This southern arc that I'm talking about is a connected swathe of First Street, Great Jackson Street, Castlefield and Trinity, working through the north. Now, of course, that swathe runs right round. We've got the university's ambitions at ID. We've got the fantastic stuff that's going on at Mayfield. We've got the new HS2 world that will come around when HS2 starts to come in there. That's going to be a fantastic new place. And you look at New Islington, Ancoats, right round to Greengate. There's a whole swathe of new communities that are starting to exist, all within 15 minutes walk of the town hall. That's the amazing thing. It's a very walkable, accessible city. We don't have to get on a tube for an hour and a half to go for a meeting. You just meet somebody next door. And the opportunities out to the Etihad, out to the stadium, through Holt Town, through the Medlock Valley. I remember doing some sketches once about the Medlock coming through almost rolling hills, obviously full of scrapyards and everything at the moment, but you can imagine that being transformed into a really beautiful environment. I know I'm running out of time. And as part of that first street will be this piece, which is a co-living development that we're working with Downing on, 2,200 rooms. But at its heart is, again, a new public space where there'll be market stalls, and you literally cross a crossing, and you're in Hume, so you're connecting those communities that have been excluded so far right into the city centre, and you'll be able to walk safely through those public spaces right into the city heart. And then at Trinity Island, we've designed 4 towers that sit on a landscape. Again, 64% of this site is landscaping by the side of the River Irwell. Now, what we've got here are, obviously, at a gateway to Manchester, a series of buildings that have been positioned deliberately on their site to maximise sunlight into those public spaces, to mitigate wind. But also, they're 2 pair of quite discrete, purpose-built buildings. Now, you know, we get criticised a lot for using glass, but actually triple glazing is a very, very sustainable solution. A concrete frame is never going to be replaced again, and particularly residential, you're on 999-year leases. I'm working on a site that's got an office building on it that was built in 1984, and it's being demolished. That is unsustainable when you're talking about buildings that are 30 years old and they've run the last of their time. These sorts of structures that we're working on are highly sustainable. If you imagine there's one plug and it's serving 500 residents, it's not a suburb, it's not eating into the countryside, it's intensifying. And on this side, 2 car park spaces, you probably never even notice them, but if you come in from Liverpool, on the bottom here, Regent Road and then Trinity Way, it's gash space left over after motorways, basically. And we're creating a new community there that will link in with the factory, will link in with the whole of the St John's development that we master planned originally with Allied London. And it's Liverpool Road, where we are now, is just at the bottom there. So again, these are forgotten sites that can be brought back to beneficial use, not for terraced housing, but for high density living and public space that for the first time ever will give us access to the river. Now, placemaking is at the heart of what we do. You might think all we're interested in is glass towers. Actually, I'm much more interested in the places that we're creating in which the buildings sit. Some may be tall, some may be horizontal. It doesn't matter. It's about the placemaking. This first came to us as something really important when we won the competition to rebuild Manchester back in 1996 when 400 people were living in this city. And the whole concept behind it was the extension of St Anne's Square through to the northern part of the city that it was run down. If you remember in those days, look, the site of Cathedral Gardens is a car park. The Printworks is derelict. The Corn Exchange had a few stalls in it. It wasn't a place that anybody went to. The shambles themselves, all this here, that is finally being redeveloped now with David Russell, the last piece in the jigsaw, was a barrier along Market Street. And it was literally poor to the north, wealthy to the south of Market Street. It was a real barrier, and I could spend just 15 minutes talking about changing that. But what we've been able to do in that one gesture of New Cathedral Street, opening up the square, Urbis, now the Millennium Quarter is starting to be landscaped, that's all coming through. But it's allowed people like Noma, as part of their estate, to carry on. And, you know, this is a scheme we're doing for Noma that's on site at the moment, an office building. Muse are doing a fantastic development next to Victoria Station. All the old listed buildings around the CIS are being converted, and we're getting Amazon and Google, and, you know, lots of fantastic occupants coming in there. but also it allows us to do things like a new education facility, not a university building, but Manchester College, which is almost complete now. And that fits in and amongst. And again, the location of that, it's closer to Harvey Nichols. I remember Tony Wilson saying to me once, I know you can tell you're from Manchester because you always refer to how far it is from Kendall's. Whereas sometimes Londoners refer to Harvey Nichols, but it is Kendall. It's a pity that's going, but it's literally 5 minutes walk to either Harvey Nichols or Kendall's. And inside you've got this amazing space. These are for young kids on apprenticeships and training. And I'm really excited about that it's about what we can do in terms of investment in creating new jobs and opportunities for the young people in Manchester. Now, this is a little diagram that, to me, is quite interesting, that this ring, I call it a rust ring almost. It was a rust belt of dead sites, car parking, derelict sheds, actually following almost the trajectory of the inner ring road around the city. And all these dots are new buildings, and quite often a lot of those are tall new buildings. And I think what's exciting is that we're not destroying our city centre, our city core. We're sort of embracing it with this new accommodation and these new offices and these new spaces and new hotels and new public spaces. So we're letting the city breathe out a little bit. And instead of it coming into dereliction, it's actually coming into really interesting new neighbourhoods. And soon we'll be able to walk around the whole city. And this last diagram, you'll be glad to know, is a diagram I did that tried to just show how, if we think about the greening of Deansgate, the greening of the route through Piccadilly up to Piccadilly Station, and then a green boulevard linking Mayfield, Circle Square, First Street, Great Jackson Street, Castlefield, Trinity Island. Manchester doesn't have the luxury of a Central Park or a Regent's Park or a Royal Park. It has 125 fractured public spaces. And if we think about connecting all those up, it will make one amazing park and one amazing experience. And all those green spots there are public spaces, some of them less desirous than others. And I know there's a big competition coming on for Piccadilly Gardens. So we have it. We're not in the traditional way, but let's just think about how we can connect these spaces. And that might mean reducing traffic. And I know the city are working hard on that. Obviously, legal challenges with bus operators and all those things aside, we as a population need to be able to walk safely around our city, and we can do that, and it's connectable. And this sort of diagram just shows that the city core, and I've not even extended it beyond, but the city core is a very navigable, exciting public space that all the residents and the occupants of the city can enjoy. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Ian. An insightful presentation. Opportunity abounds in Manchester for anyone who was thinking that all the space was taken up already. We're going to welcome our first panel to the stage now. We've got Paddy Kennedy, UK Regional Head of Flexible Workspace at Cllr, Caroline Simpson, Corporate Director of Place at Stockport Council, Simon Ismail, co-founder of Salboy, and of course Ian Simpson, founding partner of SimpsonHaugh. Could you make your way to the stage, please? Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Remember, as well, there is an opportunity for you to ask questions, whether it's about Ian's presentation or anything that we cover on this panel. The information is in the top corner there. Go to sly.do and the code is Manchester. Okay. Simon, we'll start with you. Looking at Ian's presentation there about high density development, the intensification was a word used. Is that a sort of do you buy into that method of development? Is that what you think Manchester should be pushing for, that kind of high density, big towers?
Absolutely, yeah, I do. I think it was a great presentation, actually. I really enjoyed that, genuinely did. And I don't think I can add much more to it. It was fantastic. It was exactly right in what he was saying. We do need to build high, you know, to house. There's a shortage of housing in the city centre, and the best way to do that for the environment as well is to build high. So yeah, I've got no problem with tall glass towers.
Ian, a lot of these developments, Deansgate Square that you mentioned, are not necessarily affordable for a lot of people. Is there a risk that we're forcing some younger people out, so the people who can't afford those, and that we're gentrifying the city centre to a degree?
I just following on from what Simon said as well, is that what's really important, and I think the City Council and all the developers who are operating in this city will concur, it's about quality. It's not just putting up the sort of buildings that went up in the 60s. And often I'm not that old that I was designing buildings in the 60s and the 50s, but accused of the failure of those point blocks, which were often social housing blocks and maintenance problems. So the quality of the home and the quality of the amenity that goes with those high density buildings is fundamental. And we're privileged to have developers who are working in this city who are completely aligned with that vision and ambition. Now, in terms of pricing people out, we've got to remember is anything we build here is 1/10 the cost of anything in London. So, and even in value terms, when we're trying to get values up a little bit, but it's not precluding anybody. As I say, there's thousands of people living in Deansgate Square, the average age of 31. So there's opportunities in those sorts of developments. You don't have to buy. Most young people just want to rent. They don't know where they're going to be in 2 years' time. I mean, I look at it from my mentality as being of an age where you could work, earn some money, buy a house. Actually, you know, that world has gone now. And it's actually, we're moving more towards a European model where nobody really thinks of buying their houses until they're in the late 30s or 40s. So young people, transient, quick moving, completely different to me as an animal, are quite happy to rent. And I think the price level is varied across the city. And to be honest, the more we have, the more choice there is. And it also, in a sense, gives reduced rents against some of the older properties. So properties like Beetham Tower, for instance, might not be as attractive now when you've got Deansgate Square, so because it doesn't have the amenities, so that reduces that rent. But also it means that those young people can come out of flat shares in Fallowfield or wherever it is and release that property for family homes, which is what it needs to be. And it's the same argument around student accommodation.
Thank you. Caroline, looking at Ian's presentation there, that kind of high density development, as Stockport dropped out of the GMSF, their housing need has increased by about 5,000 units more or less. There is demand for housing in Stockport, but also that's against a desire not to see homes built in the green belt, of which Stockport has plenty. Can you see that kind of high density development translating into Stockport?
No, simply. I think, as has been said, a fantastic presentation that reflects the ambition and the opportunity in the city, and that's absolutely right and needed for the whole of Greater Manchester. I think the story for towns is very different and quite rightly so. I think what we are building as Greater Manchester is a kind of and rather than either or a competitive environment, and our job is really to reflect the right kind of development for the place that it's in, as has been said. And for Stockport, that's really different. Yes, we are looking at increasing densities, particularly in our urban centres. That's absolutely at the heart of our strategy, for all the reasons that everybody's familiar with. Nobody wants to sprawl on Greenbelt and overdevelop in green spaces. But you're absolutely right, we have a housing need, as we do right across Greater Manchester. And I think what we're looking for is that balance, certainly in Stockport Town Centre at the moment, which is our main focus for development, for housing, but also for development of new public institutions and public realm, repurposing old retail, really revitalising the high street and building on the connectivity and the transport infrastructure. It is our absolute main focus. And we are really fortunate and delighted to be working with developers like Capital and Centric and Investor, who are all present now in Stockport developing their quality products. But they're very distinctive to what we've seen this morning so far, and quite rightly so. It has to be in the place, it has to reflect the distinctiveness of each of our towns, but that's a good thing. It's not a kind of right or wrong in kind of one place.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. And so much going on in Stockport. You mentioned Capital and Centric there. That's their Weir Mill scheme is up for approval next week, I think. Repurposing an old listed mill. Yesterday we had the big news about a bid to government for funding for a hospital. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we've been working with the Foundation Trust, the hospital in Stepping Hill, for a number of weeks and months. You will be familiar with hospital settings on out-of-town sites, have sprawling real estate, not necessarily in the most accessible locations, and that's certainly the case for Stepping Hill. And whilst they provide excellent healthcare, really, if you're thinking about the future of healthcare provision and in investing in an estate, then it's it's quite obvious, really, that the focus for new build and new investment in estates should be around urban centres that are really well connected. The amount of infrastructure currently in Stockport Town Centre, but also planned with new Metrolink extension, HS2 connectivity in a few years' time. It makes absolute sense to think about the alignment of anchor institutions around urban centres that is linked to development of a whole new urban neighbourhood, and is, in doing so, repurposing retail space, creating density, but again at the right scale and massing for that area. And what our health partners in Stockport see for that project is it becoming a real catalyst for change of a whole healthcare system, which really pushes out into neighbourhoods, that preventative, that early access, that effectively reduces the number of people that then have to enter hospital. But when they do, it's in a really fantastic new, well-accessible, future-focused facility. So that's the kind of work we've been doing together, and the Trust are putting in an expression of interest to government this morning that we will hope very much with our partners will get us on a short list and lead us on the way to further development. It's early days, but it's part of the transformation and the ambition, I think, of Stockport Borough, but one that reflects its population and its residents.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll come more onto the Mayoral Development Corporation later, and the powers that gives Stockport and the pull as well for investment a little bit later on. In Stockport as well, you're pushing on with the second phase of Exchange, which is an office scheme. Paddy, I'll come to you, our office expert. How do you see the office market at the moment? Obviously, last year we had a huge slowdown in terms of take-up. Are things getting back into motion now?
Yes, certainly. I think the first telling sign of that is my phone's been ringing a lot more in the last couple of months, which is always promising. But yeah, it's been a torrid time. I think any sort of occupiers with lease events, we're looking to review that. It's been difficult for companies to establish their requirements with more remote and agile working. But we act on behalf of one particular occupier that pre-pandemic was put a requirement in for 10,000 square feet in the city centre. This was then adjusted within the pandemic and refined to sort of 5,000-6,000 square feet. And anyway, it's come full circle now, and they put the requirement back out for 10,000 square feet because they're acknowledging that the need for office space. Someone put it to me that they're adult schools almost, if you like. Your mind is engaged very differently when you're in an office environment than when you are working from home. So there's a real need for office space, and that's been recognised. and for sure that we've seen an increase in demand for that space. How the space is designed, created at the moment is something that's looking to change. We might see less sort of banks of desks that can be done, even the most mundane sort of email tasks. You know, I think there's an acceptance that there will be more remote and agile working. If it's 3.5 days a week, it differs from company to company, but the need really is to get people into the office and have more collaborative areas, more meeting rooms, to get that interaction and sharing ideas and views as well.
Absolutely. And Simon, a lot of Solboy's work in Manchester and Salford is residential, but you're developing an office in Shude Hill, which had consent to be a residential scheme, but then you swapped that for offices. What was the thinking behind that? And were you worried then when the pandemic hit and everyone was forced to work from home?
Well, firstly, the thinking behind changing the residential scheme to an office scheme, it was actually originally supposed to be a hotel scheme. That was declined. So, and declined on the basis of that there's a lot of resistance against large high-rise towers. That's the problem. Which not necessarily high-rise. It was 16 stories at the time. We converted that to a residential scheme, got planning at 18 stories, and then just decided that it was something that we'd like to move into the city centre. We didn't believe we wanted something bespoke for us. We wanted to make sure that we designed something that suited our needs. So we decided that, and we wanted to be in the Northern Quarter, where we believed is the kind of people that we wanted to attract to our business, is where they were. So that was it. That was the reasoning behind it, and nothing more than that. Since then, we've decided, and what happened during the pandemic was we wasn't worried about it at all. You know, Ian will tell you, we're just in the process of designing or redesigning an existing envelope of viaducts commercial space, 320,000 square feet, and we want to make it best in class. We want to make it the best office development that we can have in the city centre, and we decided to do that during the pandemic. That's because we do believe that, and I like that term actually of adult learning. I do think that people need to be in the office, and people want to be in the office. You know, we're building these spaces for people to live in the city centre because they want to live and work and go out in the city centre, which again is great for the environment because they haven't got to travel into the city centre. So we want to make these spaces perfect, and you know, it's place making again for living. And,
absolutely.
So I do believe they'll all be coming out.
Yeah, I mean, Paddy, there's a massive pipeline of offices coming forward in the city centre specifically, and Salford as well at New Bailey. There's a lot of uncertainty around at the moment still. I know that there's positive signs in terms of the market reawakening, but is it a risk for developers to push on with these office developments, especially given the cost of construction and all the uncertainty around supply chain at the moment?
I think there's a real flock to quality in terms of office space as well. I think there's a real piece about well-being and tech and sustainability. They're the three main focal points. So in terms of all these new developments, obviously the connectivity is going to be better, the tech within the building as well. So I think that's where the demand is. But you know, we've seen Manchester in the last 10, 15 years go from strength to strength. And that continues to be the case. We're seeing more and more global occupiers coming into the city, a lot more tech businesses coming into the city. So no, I would argue that I wouldn't see it as a risk to be cracking on with these developments. And I think the inward investment that's coming into the city is warranted, really.
Mm-hmm. And Ian, more generally, on the uncertainty point, are you finding that things that you're designing are being stopped, the process is being stopped while developers take stock and wait for a bit more certainty, or are developers pushing on and getting things out of the ground and ignoring the uncertainty?
Getting staff is the most difficult thing, and the reason why it's difficult getting staff is that we're busy. And what's really exciting is the confidence of the developers that we're working with and are transforming this city. And I think work stopped for about a month in March 2020, or whenever it was that the pandemic hit us. Fortunately, the construction industry wasn't shut down, so everybody went back to work, literally. And I think there's a real confidence in moving forward, and we're not seeing anybody sitting on their hands in this city. I think there's a real desire to move things forward and to create these new places at a pace, and I'm really excited over the next 10 years. I've always said we've had 25 years of growth. We need another 25 years at least of continued input, transforming this city to make it really stand out as an amazing city, international city. But there's a lot of work still to do, and fortunately there's a lot of people share that vision, and we're just happy to be playing our architectural part in supporting that, because without that we're not going to get the investment, we're not going to get the new companies coming here. We have to be confident and lead the way, and then we'll get the new jobs. And to be honest, if we can get jobs for the people of Manchester and a lot of people moving into the city, then that's must be the ambition of the City Council.
So on the City Council, big news this week about Richard Leese. So Richard Leese departing in December after 25 years. Ian, you've been around for much of his tenure. What do you have to say about what he's done for the city? He was always considered very pro-development, wasn't he?
Yeah, obviously Richard's had a massive legacy alongside Sir Howard. Together they transformed the city together after 1996. Obviously prior to that, Graham Stringer was the leader, and I remember that relationship, and he was involved in regeneration of Castlefield. But really, Sir Richard and Sir Howard grasped the nettle around transforming Manchester post-bomb to make it the city that it is today. And he's always been an advocate of good quality and change, and he'll be difficult to replace. But what is really important for everybody sitting in this room is that we get some, not necessarily continuity, but we need that attitude and that approach to embrace change, to embrace investment, and support the people who want to spend money in Manchester. If we get somebody folding their arms and saying, not in my city, then that money will go elsewhere. And you just have to look east to see Leeds is desperately trying to catch up, and will do so unless we can maintain the momentum in Manchester. And we need a civic leadership that and officer leadership that can go beyond Sir Howard and go beyond Sir Richard and give us another 25, 30 years of continuity and vision.
There was a suggestion when I was speaking to people yesterday about this, that the new leader would have to appease left-leaning councillors more than Sir Richard Leese did, and that might result in a change for the development community, more of a focus on social inequality, more of a focus on affordable housing. Simon, what do you want to see from the new leader? What do they have to do to keep driving forward the regeneration of Manchester, as Ian mentioned?
It's very difficult following Ian, who's a local hero and a legend in development, because he says it all and he says it perfectly. We're new to development, so what Sir Richard and the short time that I had working with Sir Howard, what they've done for the city and what I've seen over the years is fantastic. And I believe they've really driven it forward, and they understand quality, and they had a vision and a plan for the city along with Dave Roscoe, and they've worked it really, really well. I think they've done a great job. So it'd be sad to see him go, but what the replacement will need to do is to just carry that on. I can't really say any more than that, other than just to make sure that we don't see that investment go elsewhere, and they do welcome us with open arms, and they work with us and they help us, and I can call most people at the council now on their mobile phones, and they'll answer to me, and they'll talk to me about. I was talking to Jill earlier about this. The problem is you're normally only calling them when there's a problem, which is awful. It should be a little bit more, and that's my fault as well as anybody else's. But I'd just like to see it just carry on, and I'm sure it will, because there's people like Ian who knows more about development in this city than anybody else. So listen to him, not me. But he'll make sure it carries on.
I wish I had any control over. I think the whole social side is a really key issue, and we as developers, we can't address that, and we can't underplay the value and the importance of dealing with the underprivileged elements of this city. We've got to deal with that. But to me, it's not about preventing change happening, because the change can help facilitate that support. The two things are intrinsically linked together. It's not one thing or another. We've got to bring everybody up at the same level within this city, and that's giving everyone opportunity, which doesn't exist at the moment.
Absolutely. We'll go to a couple of audience questions now. So as you can see, they're on the screen there. We'll go to this first question. If you can see the little thumbs up at the side, you can upvote any questions that you would like to see asked. We have one here for Caroline. How can towns like Stockport compete with the city centres in terms of office space now that people may be looking to commute less? So as we said before, you're pushing on with plans for offices. The first two buildings, I think I'm right in thinking, are let to mainly local companies. So what's the vision for the offices coming forward?
So we've got another 65,500 square foot in planning at the moment. So this is a development partnership between the council and Muse. So yes, we've done 2 phases so far. Really good take-up in both good anchor tenants. So BASF have just gone into the most recent scheme and consolidated their HQ there. I just don't think it's a point about competition. I think it's a completely different offer. So the quality of the space is on a par, I would say, with what's happening in the city, but the density isn't there, and there's actually a really attractive offer in terms of, it's more affordable, and it offers an environment in a town centre location, not a city. It's extremely accessible in Stockport, we know, 10 minutes from the city centre or 12 minutes, many times an hour. It's like a tube stop rather than a kind of normal station. So we still think there is demand within local businesses, but we're also getting inward investment inquiries as well. So it's not something we've gone into this next phase in a kind of gung-ho, yes, we're absolutely on top of this, but we are really optimistic, and we believe in the product, we believe in the location, and we've got some great advocates of the tenants and partners that we're working with already in Stockport Exchange. And I think what's really important is it is part of a much bigger proposition for Stockport. So, what companies who are coming into Stockport Exchange see and they can feel, because it's happening around them, is the wider change, the ambition, and the connectivity into everything else that's going on, not least of which, potential new hospital, but the new neighbourhoods that are growing up around it. So I think the principles around placemaking and having jobs in locations and houses where people want to be in, kind of with all the amenities and connectivity, I think the principles are exactly the same. I think the product is slightly different because it's more bespoke to that location. But I think there is a market for all of the spec development that's going on at the moment. And to be honest, we can't afford not to keep going with that pipeline. I think if we stop at this stage, there's a greater risk for towns like Stockport. But we're really optimistic, and all the signs so far are that we've got growing interest already in the new build that hopefully will be coming out the ground next year.
Fantastic. And Paddy, just while we're on offices, and we will come back to these questions because there's some good ones, really appreciate you taking the time to get involved. The out-of-town office market, so places like Stockport, there was a prediction during the pandemic that these places would become the new places to work rather than the city centre, kind of hub and spoke model, if you will. Are we seeing that come to fruition or not? How do you view the out-of-town office market currently?
Yeah, I think because of agile and more remote working coming into play or has been accelerated with the pandemic, I think it's been clear. A lot of people said to me during lockdown, it would be good to leave the house for whatever reason, whether it's you've got kids or pets, or it's a distracting place rather than an office environment, but don't necessarily want to have to commute into a city centre for that day, if you like. So I think there's definitely more of an attraction to have out-of-town offices as well. I work with a lot of the flexible workspace operators, and they're seeing that as a real expansion and growth area. The out of town, out of city centre into suburban towns, as a place that they would like to set up, and it just provides exactly that sort of drop-in setup, plug and play option. So I think that's something that we can expect to see in the next few years as well.
Yeah, and in terms of flexible working, we're seeing a lot of that in the city as well. You've been on a few deals that have happened sort of during the pandemic, really, and we've seen a rise in flexible workspace providers. Can you tell us a bit more about that and the drivers behind it?
Sure. I think it's been, again, a torrid time for flexible workspaces in the pandemic. Typically, businesses will sign a sort of 12-month commitment, and we've sort of been riding this pandemic now for 18 months. So a lot of the businesses that were in those spaces obviously had an easy exit, if you like. So vacancy, occupancy levels and vacancy were difficult to deal with for those operators. However, it's also been the term first to catch a cold and first to recover. They're very well placed now to recapture demand in the sense that they're fully fitted out, they are shorter term commitments, and they offer all sorts of amenity and well-being in terms of meeting rooms, yoga studios, you name it, that have really been able to attract those occupiers. I think one of the key drivers, a recent company I worked with was Veristar. They moved into Bruntwood's newly refurbished block, which was previously Lowry House, and they basically wanted to have the short-term or shorter-term commitment rather than a conventional lease, but have everything fitted out for them, have a private demise, but they were attracted to a building that offered an independent coffee shop, a gym, showers, bike racks, etc., and was ready-made for them to move into. So there's been an increase in demand. I speak to all of the operators in Manchester on a regular basis, and their occupancies are boosting rapidly now. Inquiries are picking up for that type of space as well. So, and we're now starting to see landlords, speculatively fit out more of their space as well to have that, plug and play option, and reduces that initial capex for occupiers.
Absolutely, thank you very much. We'll come back to the questions. Question from Ellie Philcox here. Simon, I'll aim this one at you. Given the quality of schemes being delivered in terms of amenity space, etc., is there a case and demand for the restriction on one-bedroom apartments in Manchester being lifted?
Yeah, there is a case, and I do think there is a definite demand for it. Why? Because what we see is that, Ian talked about it earlier, that we are in generation rent. That is what it is. The youth of today do not, whether or not they can afford to buy their own apartment or house is a different matter altogether. They don't want to. I've got 4 boys myself, and my eldest is 20. He does not want a property. He doesn't want it. It's a noose around his neck as far as he's concerned. They want to be free. They want to go away, and it's. I'm from the same school as you. We were brought up to own your own castle. They don't want it. But what they do want is they want that privacy. They want the privacy of their own demise. They want to live in that one-bedroom apartment and have their autonomy. But they want to be able to be in a community where they can go out and mingle and mix with like-minded people within those developments and within the city centre. So there are not enough, in my opinion, one-bedroom apartments in the city. There needs to be more. The 2 beds are important, and the 3 beds are just as important. The 3 beds are very difficult to move. Mainly because just the cost, the capital cost of them, the yields don't work. Because remember that it is an investor that is buying these units. Normally, the 3 beds can go to owner occupiers, but the 2 beds are all definitely investor purchases. And the reason they're buying them is to make sure that whoever is going to rent them can have democratic living, as in same size bedrooms. They can split the rent, share the cost. But we're finding, the cost of living in Manchester is less than half of that in London. And it is becoming a multicultural city because of that reason, because there's so much for these kids to do when they come here, the youth to do. So because it's so cheap and the wages are rising and there's fantastic opportunities, especially within the tech industry, they can afford their own apartment and they want one beds, but they can't do it. There's not enough, so they're having to rent, pay that bit extra and get two beds. So you're right, Ellen, we do need more one beds.
Thank you, Simon. Great question from Alan at Waits as well. Green links and spaces in the city is exactly what Manchester needs. Quality placemaking is key, but is more needed from a public policy perspective to optimise this. Ian, what are your thoughts on that? You spoke a bit about the green infrastructure.
I think that there needs to be some sort of city council-led joined-up thinking in terms of how these spaces might come together. But of course, you know, it's relying very much on private sector to deliver these public spaces, which are then usually managed by that private sector operator. And you look at Spinningfields is a good success, obviously Deansgate Square. But the City Council have got to look after the streets. I mean, at the moment, the one thing I get distressed about is the quality of the maintenance within the city centre. I mean, after last week's Pride Festival, I mean, you couldn't walk down the street without tripping over bottles. And I mean, we've got to be very rigorous about maintaining quality, and that's existing streets around the city centre. But also try and adopt a framework that stitches things together. The last diagram I had shows that it is possible to do that if there's some broader thinking rather than piecemeal thinking. Then all the developers can work together with the City Council to make sure we have a very connected series of public spaces. And it's starting to happen. It just, with cities, it just takes years for this to happen. But you know, Deansgate, there's proposals for landscaping Deansgate, which I think will be really good and reducing traffic. And already the Millennium Quarter, which we master planned a few years ago around Urbis and Victoria Street, all that is landscaping coming forward, and a new monument to the bomb at the arena. All that is starting to come forward, but you know, it just seems to take a long time. And I don't know, there needs to be some investment from central government to help us, to help Manchester get ahead of the game in terms of its landscaping and its infrastructure, public realm, and join this whole together so that we have a really beautiful city we can walk around. I'd like to walk around the city without traffic and go from one space to another, and it's possible. It just needs some the City Council to get probably some money to help do it, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is another question a little bit further down. Carrie, we will come back to your question at some point, but it's about Andy Burnham. So it says, nobody has mentioned the role of Andy Burnham. What is the panel's view on the influence of the Metro Mayor? Caroline, I'll come to you on this because obviously Stockport has the Mayoral Development Corporation. How effective has that been for Stockport in terms of driving investment, and obviously related to the question, how effective do you think Andy Burnham has been as the Mayor?
So from a Stockport perspective, the Metro Mayor basically stood up straight away and really championed the proposal for the Development Corporation in Stockport. Absolutely saw the potential of the town centre, the concept of town centre living, the need to develop brownfield land, but actually the need to really give a focus, concerted effort, and be a massive advocate of a particular location, not at the kind of exclusion of anywhere else, but really to get behind what the local politicians in Stockport are really focused on and aligned with. So from our point of view, he's been a real advocate and champion for the work that we've been doing. What the MDC has done, now chaired by Lord Kerslake, is given that focus. There is complete cross-party support in Stockport, and we are a very balanced council politically. But it's given that sense of unity and collective ambition and the will to succeed. And that has then been followed by a £100 million investment facility that the council has set aside, dedicated for the MDC to kickstart and support. And we know there are challenges around bringing forward development. But it's also created a focus and a hub and a critical mass of support and an ability in an area of 130 acres, which isn't on the scale of, many of which we've been talking about this morning in the city, but it is in a Stockport context. And looking at an area of that scale in one big regeneration programme gives us the opportunity right up front to think about sustainability, green space, quality of design, how do the spaces fit together and how does it connect with the rest of the town centre? What kind of social infrastructure do we need to plan for now as the development comes forward? And what it's also enabled the council to do is put a real dedicated team in place, because if the one thing that is needed in local government to really support the development industry and all the ambitions that we've talked about this morning, it is the time, the resource, the expertise, the understanding of the development process alongside the understanding how local government works and how best to engage and bring decisions through. And that needs dedicated teams, and we've got that in Stockport. But that's been built up probably over 10 years now, starting with Eamon's legacy with Stockport Exchange. We've been at this for a very long time. Yeah. We'll be at it for decades to come as well. But the MDC has provided an extra catalyst, and it's been that convening role that has enabled, in my view, development to come forward that would not have done if we didn't have that focus on that investment facility and support from the council.
Thank you very much. Ian, another question from the audience here. Do you see the increase in modular buildings and modular solutions, for example, bathroom pods used across Greater Manchester, in support of delivery of the high-rise buildings? So are we seeing more of that, modular buildings and modular bathroom pods, for example?
I think we are seeing a lot of new modular buildings coming forward. I mean, you look at what Tom's doing with Urban Splash, they're very much focused around a particular product. Within the building industry ourselves, there's a lot of modular components, glazing systems, yes, bathroom pods. But what's quite interesting is also how some developers like Renico, who are working on these, have their own concrete batching plants on site. So they cut down a lot of the transport and movement. And I think we've just got to be careful that in this world of Brexit, where one of the big pressures on contractors is obviously material costs and supply, is that we're not reliant on modular components travelling in. So we need to build up a national industry that can provide it locally to developers and contractors, rather than relying on transportation from Italy or wherever. And I think that's making life quite difficult, because we're at the cusp of new subcontractors evolving and developing locally. And I think Domis, a part of Simon's operation, particularly look to try and source products in the UK, and I think that's the way forward for contractors and to allow us to maintain quality. But actually, modular forms are just part of that process in my mind. They're not the be-all and end-all of architecture or buildings.
Yeah, and Simon, Ian mentioned Domis there, obviously the contractor arm of the development company Solboy. We have Renico as well as another developer contractor. How much of an advantage is it, sort of, in terms of margins and bottom line, in this uncertain time, to have that construction arm in-house? How much added certainty does that give to developers when bringing projects forward?
I always say it was the best move we made, meeting Lee McCarran and setting up Domis. of which me, Fred and Lee are all shareholders of it. It's our sister company. It's given us absolute control and certainty over construction, which we had none of that before. We've come from a development funding background. That's primarily what we are, and we morphed into development. So we understood the contracting and the construction sector and the black art of contracting as well, and the corners that are cut coming towards the end of a development and so on. So it's been very, very important to us, especially at the moment. And moving on to the modular point there, what Ian was talking about in the last question, was we've got to be very careful that we don't try and substitute quality with speed. You know, modular is great for certain things. It's not. We try and steer away from it as much as we can. We try and source everything in the UK, which is absolutely essential now post Brexit and it's the pandemic that's the problem, and obviously everybody knows about inflation, material costs, labour costs. We are able to sort that up because of the construction arm Domus. But it's difficult. It's I don't really understand how anybody that doesn't have a construction arm can positively can go out there now and confidently bid on sites knowing what the construction costs are going to be. You can't, because we can't. Right. We can't. We're taking a view on it and we're bidding on sites every day, but we're taking that risk. I don't understand how other people can do that. There's a real problem at the moment, and it will settle down, and we're hoping within the next 3 to 4 months when the displaced ships get back into position and start delivering materials on time and so on. But we're in a lucky place with Domus, because when we set it up, we made sure that the first thing myself and Fred said to Lee, which I know that Lee was very grateful for this, was pay your suppliers, pay them fortnightly, not monthly, not 2 monthly. And I know that's totally new for the sector. As far as I'm aware, no one else in the country does it. And the reasoning behind that was, look, your cash sat in the bank, there's no debt within Domus, the cash sat in the bank is earning you absolutely nothing in interest, but what you'll get back in goodwill from those suppliers by paying them early, which they're not used to, is tenfold. So, and we're starting to reap the rewards of that now. We're all right for 6 months in advance and so on, but yeah, it's a difficult time in construction at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll talk more about construction later with weights. We will get to this question now from Carrie, because it's extremely popular, as you can see. How do councils balance approval of new buildings whilst preserving the heritage and culture that makes Manchester a walking museum of industrial revolution? Ian, I'm going to come to you on that, because there was as part of Crown Street, Victoria Residence is the smaller of the two buildings, isn't it? And the reason for that is because it was next to a listed building. Yeah. So how do you navigate this kind of battle between old and new?
I don't think it's a battle. I think we're, again, privileged to have the rich history of buildings in this city that we do, industrial buildings. I mean, we're not Siena. Let's not get it out of proportion. We're a post-industrial building that has some good Victorian architecture and a little bit of Georgian. Again, Liverpool has much more Georgian. But I think most of what we're building on are derelict sites on this sort of periphery of the city centre. So in a way, it preserves the core of Manchester, because there's very few development sites that are able to come free within the city centre itself. So the vast majority of the development sits around the edge and embraces it. And I had this notion of this sort of the bowl that sort of keeps the scale down right in the city core and allows it to go around the edge. And I think to have the backdrop of tall buildings against listed buildings, I personally don't see that in any way detrimental to the rich architecture that we have. And I think it's important that we keep everything we can. I don't think that we've enough space here without demolishing good quality buildings. So our starting point would be to preserve and restore. And we've got Bridgewater House over on the other side of next to the Elizabeth Tower, Crown Street, that I believe has been sold and will be restored and redeveloped. So I think the juxtaposition of old and new, I think, is really exciting. And if you look at New World cities like Sydney or New York, you get a cathedral next to a 60-storey tower. Nobody thinks that diminishes the cathedral. And all this nonsense that we do have to fight against in London in terms of views and vistas and corridors and protected buildings, I think I respect all that, but it's equally quite possible to respect the industrial revolution, the industrial buildings that we have, make the most of those, but sit them in a contemporary context, because we don't live in a museum, we live in a city, and that needs different sort of product.
Yeah, and Paddy, you're speaking to people every day thinking about coming to open an office in Manchester. You know, the industrial history is one element, but what are they really coming to Manchester for? What is the real draw of Manchester?
It's quite a broad sort of question, I suppose. Well, touching back on that point, I think one of the nicest buildings in Manchester is Arkwright House, if people are familiar with that in Parsonage Gardens. Again, that's an old building and there's lots of original features within that building. We did a deal recently there to put a Riga into that building, and they've delivered a very modern fit out within the space, but again has the original features to it as well. And to go back to that point, Ian, I think it actually complements it with having the old mixed with the new rather than detracts anything, and that's apparent on the viewings as well. In terms of attracting occupiers into Manchester, as I say, there's a great deal of things really in terms of its culture. There's been more and more global occupiers. The buildings that are in Manchester now, it's just on an upward trajectory and has been for some time. There's a lot of tech businesses, as I mentioned before, coming into Manchester, seeing more of that. And I think there's one thing that I've noticed a lot more of it is these fast-growing tech businesses that grow rapidly once they get a level of investment, and it just seems to be the affordability piece as well in terms of against London, in terms of rents, but measured against the level of amenity that's in Manchester, whether that's gyms, restaurants, bars, student accommodation, universities, you name it. There's the transport links. So it's becoming, it is an international city, but it's really grown rapidly over the last 10 years, and I don't see it slowing down.
Absolutely. And Simon, looking out of Manchester and Salford, the cities a little bit, where do you see the opportunities for companies like Solboy in the rest of Greater Manchester? Are there opportunities where the margins are sufficient to explore?
Yeah, there are lots of opportunities depending on what we're not, as a company, we're not interested in just making money in development. It's not what we're about. It's got to excite us. We've got placemaking always comes up, and that is very important. But going back to the previous question about mixing old with new, I think we shouldn't have to talk about this. It's something that we should just accept that that's what you've got to do. If you want to make places great and you need to develop cities as well as surrounding areas, you've got to work with what's there, whether it be listed or good quality locally listed or local important buildings. Then accept that, and good architects, good developers, good local planners, they'll only put forward schemes that they believe are right for the city. So I think people who complain about it and kind of contest it, they don't seem to have a problem with it when nobody wants to do anything with it, and they let them go to rack and ruin. It's only when someone's trying to do something with it that they seem to have a problem. Right. Because they think someone wants to make money out of it. And look, moving out of the city centre, we're doing a scheme now, Cllr in Salford, the old Manchester Racecourse, which is, I think it's the largest housing scheme that's come through Salford for quite a while. A great opportunity. There's an opportunity there where obviously it was the former Manchester Racecourse, moved on to being student digs for Salford University. We acquired it from Salford University. And our focus there was really, or the plan that we had was, we build these lovely, beautiful spaces within the city centre where people can, the youth can go and live and enjoy life within the city centre. And when they meet their partner in the laundrette or the gym or the cinema room or wherever it may be within the development, they've got an opportunity to move out into a bit more space, which is still very commutable. So we wanted to make sure that there was an extension of our vision as a company, as in, so they've got the Salboy brand, and yeah, it was a sign of quality. So we've done that. Public open spaces are absolutely huge for us within those developments, and there are plenty more of them. There are plenty more opportunities to acquire those sites and do something special with them. I took Fred down it was probably about 3 months ago. He made me get on an helicopter for the first time, which wasn't very pleasing, but anyway. So we had to, because he didn't want to get on a normal jet. So we went down to Newquay. There's a place there called Nansledden. I don't know if anybody's heard of Nansledden. I think it's the Duchy of Cornwall. Prince Charles had decided that he wanted to do something. We built 100 years ago. We used to build fantastic properties within this country, and some of which we have to retain and love and care for alongside this new development that we're doing. And it seems now that we're moving on to the major house builders in the country, or not just them, but plenty of other developers are just building cardboard boxes where they're very mundane. They like baked bean tins on the shelf. They all look exactly the same. And he decided that on his land he wanted to do something that was going to stand the test of time, put a new high street back in, put independent shops along each side, put your butchers in, put your florist in, put your yoga studio in, whatever it may be. And these properties are absolutely stunning. This area is stunning. Putting a school in place, putting a nursery at the end, putting a local surgery there. And that's what we're trying to do now. That's what we're trying to move on to. We've started it with Cllr. We are putting, there's a place, there's a plot of land there that's identified for a primary school. We've put in the old turnstile building, which is listed, we've restored that. We're going to do something special with that for the community. And the next sites we're looking to do something like that. To try and make the quality a bit better.
Fantastic. And we'll talk more about that, creating communities and placemaking element in the next panel. Caroline, we'll finish with you before we break for some networking. What would you say to developers like Simon to entice them to Stockport? And how do you have all the plans in place, how do you go about delivering those plans and accessing the funds to deliver those plans?
So I'd say come and talk, come and have a chat. It starts with building a relationship with any partner that the future you might work with. I think it is about, are there shared values, is there shared ambition, is there a joint long-term view? Because I think, certainly from local government, we absolutely think that long-term. And then I think what we are building in Stockport is a real confidence about delivery, momentum, pipeline. We've got a pretty clear idea of where opportunities exist, but we're not kind of managing them in a micro way. We absolutely see the potential for things to evolve. We don't have a tight, rigid master plan, but we've got some really clear principles and value-led ambition. I think relationship with politicians is absolutely key as well. And we see, there's a really good relationship between development industry and politicians in Stockport. Where does the money come from? Well, I think that's always always the question, but always a incredibly complicated one to answer, and it depends. But I think the sense of confidence we have is we'll find a way, whether it's through a combination of public money, private investment, if that scheme is good enough and, we've got enough confidence in the market and we're getting that sweet spot of making sure we're building quality, then generally in my experience so far, we've found a way through some of those really complex problems for most things.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That's all we've got time for on our first panel. Please can we give a round of applause to Ian, Simon, Paddy and Caroline. There were some questions left up there on Slido. If we could leave them on for the next panel, we may be able to get to those. There was one directed at you, Caroline, from James. Maybe James can grab Caroline during the networking break and ask that one. Apologies for not getting to it. So we're going to take a break for some networking, grab a coffee, have a chat, a pastry, and we'll see you back in the room shortly. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. If you could take your seats, please. We're ready to kick off the second half. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the first panel and the networking break, had a coffee, feeling ready to kick things off again. We're going to start the second half with a presentation from Oldham Council Leader Arooj Shah, who's going to come up to the stage shortly. Remember, when you're listening to the presentation, if any questions come to mind, Slido is the place to submit them, and I'll try and get to as many as I can. So everybody, hands together for Councillor Arooj Shah, please.
Hi everybody, just chuck that on the floor. I'm really delighted to be here today, and I have to say I was incredibly nervous because Regen isn't my bag. I became leader in May, so it's a learning curve for me, and I actually got here early and looked through the door, but you all looked really intense, and I was like, do I ring my staff now and tell them I'm not feeling well and run out of here? But I think I'm really delighted to be here, and I was really excited to see so many women in the audience as well. I think that's incredibly important. I wasn't expecting that, so well done to North West Place to make sure that we had that gender equality here. I am going to start off with a presentation, but you are going to be delighted to know that I'm not going to bore you or kill you with boredom. It's literally a few minutes, and there's a few videos that break it up, but it's really, really short, and it will just give you an insight to the opportunity that we have in Oldham going forward. So I'll take you through it now. So Oldham Council, as you know, we've got really good opportunities there at the minute, and we've got really, really big plans. And what I'm hoping to achieve here today is to make you visualise and get Oldham for the real sense and opportunity that it has. But also, I'm hoping that people will want to work with us going forward. But before getting into all that detail, I thought it would be really helpful to just show you a short video to give you a sense of what Oldham is like as a place and the scale of opportunity that we have. I didn't choose the music, by the way. So we started creating a better place, which is our vision for Oldham last year. And by design, you'll have noticed it's more flexible than your typical master plan. And what we really wanted to do is clearly set our aims, but also work with the spaces that we have. But we didn't want to be too prescriptive from the outset. So what we wanted to do was design a master plan that actually had flexibility into it, and that we could actually use opportunities and contributions as and when they come. The key to creating a better place in Oldham is that we want residents' voices at the centre of it. So instead, we're looking to make sure that our residents have proper input at every stage and giving ourselves the flexibility to respond to that, to their contributions. And you know, COVID was actually a really welcome, unfortunately, flexibility. It goes without saying that we were really grateful for COVID, but not in not because of the pandemic, but the flexibility that it actually gave us, because it was just a few months after releasing that vision, and that meant that we could adapt to our plans in light of the changing economic reality. But the scale is still significant. It's a total investment of £285 million, 2,000 quality homes and 100 apprentices. So, people are at the heart of our vision. Every element of our work will put a strong emphasis on social value, and we want people in Oldham to see not just their town improving, but actually to make sure that all the changes that we make, they understand how that will improve their lives. We know that great places don't just happen by building shiny homes, and we know that by bringing people together, by finding harmony between varied opportunities and interests and activities of our community, we can get people to work alongside us. So in creating a better place, we've looked to combine several elements. We're creating a special place for quality homes to give people a decent place to live and encourage more natural footfall in our town centre. We're putting a great emphasis on the link between regeneration, skills and jobs, and creating new opportunities for all our people. But we know that the days of town centres have really, really declined. So alongside retail, we're looking for homes that will offer a diverse culture, leisure and nighttime economy. We're going to be building high-quality homes, attractive spaces for businesses, and placing them in such a way that they can thrive. We're looking at the links between the buildings that we make in the town centre so that they're easier to navigate, but actually they're really, really more pleasant to spend time in. And finally, this is about the long-term future of the borough. It's situated between Manchester and the National Peak District, and so Oldham has a huge potential as a centre of both green technology and green living. So we're looking to make all our projects as green, clean and sustainable as possible, and have some really ambitious ideas to put Oldham on the map. So what are the main projects of the jigsaw? I'll go into a little more detail on some of these, but alongside the housing building plans, we have 4 key projects. So the regeneration of Spindles, which is the town centre at the heart of Oldham, a brand new linear park, a theatre and performance space, and Northern Roots Country Park. As I mentioned previously, one of the benefits of the flexibility that we've had and seen through COVID means that we could we have the ability to respond to opportunities, and that's part of the reason we've been able to succeed with bids such as the Future High Streets Fund and the Towns Fund. And these costs have significantly reduced costs to the taxpayer in Oldham and allowed us to move forward at a really good pace despite the pandemic. So focusing on a few of our flagship projects, I'm going to start with Spindles, which is our town centre shopping centre. So here's a short video just to introduce some of the plans. So we bought this last year, and it gave us, one of the reasons why we did it was because it gives the council and our residents greater control of a site that's within the town centre. And like many shopping centres, it has been impacted by the pandemic, but retail has changed anyway. So buying the site meant that we had the ability to decide its future, but also we're trying to encourage business and enterprise. And because the council owns it, it means we can have influence over factors such as rents and business rates, which we're hoping to be really, really flexible with. It also allows our Tommyfield Market to move into the shopping centre. That's been a massive problem for us in Oldham because the Tommyfield Market traders were in a business that wasn't fit for purpose. They weren't supposed to be there for as long as they have been there. And actually we found through the pandemic that they suffered a great loss. So they'll now be in the centre of the Spindle shopping centre, which will have increased footfall and they will benefit from it. And then we can turn some of the unused space, because retail isn't what it used to be. People now tend to shop more online. We can use some of that unused space in the shopping centre to make more flexible offices. So we can use the current civic centre where the council staff are situated. We can move them over to Spindle's shopping centre, and there's loads of benefits in that. It increases footfall, it helps local economy, but it's also allows us to use where the current civic centre is, an opportunity to build more homes. So our linear park, so this is another new short video just to set the scene. So with the pressure of having to build homes and our green spaces being under threat, as a politician, you can understand that I'm thrilled that I'm able to lead a creation of a really sparkling green town centre space right in the middle of our town centre. But the park will make Oldham a nicer place to live, work and visit, and it will hopefully enhance the quality of life. Whilst I understand there's no direct investment or future investment that we will get from this, I think it's really important to create something that is attractive, that will increase footfall and encourage people to visit the town centre. So alongside this and potential commercial benefits, it supports our new Green Deal ambitions. So the last short video that I'm going to play for you focuses on Northern Roots, which is our country park. So I'll just give you a short video to give you a taste of that.
So Northern Roots is a project to take this amazing green space, 160 acres in the heart of Oldham in Greater Manchester, and develop it into the UK's largest urban farm and eco-park in a way that creates jobs and skills and businesses for local people while preserving and enhancing the biodiversity and the environmental value of this site. That great beautiful field there should become a massive market garden where local people are producing all sorts of edible crops. We should have a visitor centre with maybe a microbrewery and a shop, maybe a production kitchen. Up on the top there'll be a whole area dedicated to different forms of sport, football, cricket, hockey, what have you. And then as you get further down to the site it gets much more wooded and wilder. You'll be able to see real improvements to the biodiversity of the site, all sorts of activities connecting people with nature, educational facilities, festivals, cultural activities. You could come and get married here, maybe come camping. We want to see how this site and this project is helping with people's health and well-being, giving them opportunities to access better food, physical activity, mental well-being, communal well-being and just a sense of pride. And we want to do all that while creating opportunities for people to build skills and build businesses and become financially independent while working with and on the land.
So the kind of things we're looking at are, can we make more carbon storage on the site by planting more trees, introducing new species of trees, perhaps increasing the biodiversity through diversifying the plants, more wetlands, more woodlands. We're also going to be looking at renewable energy, other opportunities within the new buildings of the site.
Northern Route has the potential to transform the way we think about urban green space, not just in Greater Manchester, but globally.
I'm not aware of any other project of this nature in the UK or Europe. I think you probably have to go to the west coast of the United States to find something similar. I don't think when most people think of Oldham that they envisage this amazing green space, and probably most people don't know about Oldham's track record already of green projects, growing projects, green energy projects. It's very unusual, I think, for a council to be at the heart of a project like this. This land is almost exclusively owned by Oldham Council, and they're putting this land at the disposal of the Northern Routes project so that this project can take place. So all of that makes it really timely and unusual.
So Northern Routes is a fantastic opportunity, and we think it's really got the potential to put Oldham on the map. It's already been featured in The Guardian as one of the most top attraction sites to visit, and we haven't even really got started yet. It's set across 160 acres, and it's just up the road from the town centre, and it's helping us to become a beacon of community growing, local food production, and renewable energy and diversity. During the pandemic, our parks team used part of the site to grow fruit and veg for the local community, which was really beneficial because it meant those people that didn't lived in deprived communities were able to get food for free. So it had lots of purposes, but we're currently consulting on the master plan for Northern Routes because, again, we want to put our residents at the centre of our work. It's situated in the middle of two fairly deprived communities, and I think the test of success for that site for me is that the people who live in the immediate vicinity should see an improvement in their everyday lives, and if that happens then clearly it's worked. But with funding from the Towns Fund, it's meant that we can start consulting and start the initial works without having to rely on anything else. So we're taking those initial steps, but we do realise that for this to reach its full potential, the project will need to work with a wide range of partners. So that was basically a whistle-stop tour of some of our plans. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope it gives people the opportunity to come and work with us here in Oldham. And I'm ready to take any easy questions.
Fantastic. A round of applause for Councillor Arooj, Shah, please. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. The nerves didn't show, and that Northern Routes is something that we've been following at Place Northwest, and it's a fascinating project. We'll talk a little bit more about that. 160 acres makes the park at Mayfield, look quite small in comparison. We'll welcome our next panel to the stage now. We've got Dave Saville, Regional Director at Waits Construction, Lucy Walwork, Senior Planner at LUC, Paul Kelly, Development Director at Scarborough Group, Aidan Thatcher, Assistant Director of Growth and Housing at Wigan Council, and of course Councillor Arooj Shah. As Councillor Shah said, if you do have any questions about her presentation, you know what to do by now. I've mentioned it a few times. So go to Slido and use the code Manchester. So welcome everybody. Councillor Shah, we'll start with you. Some fascinating projects in Oldham. I just wonder if you could run us through the aims of that project in terms of addressing socio-economic issues in Oldham. What do you hope that those projects can improve in terms of the life of the residents there?
Well, I think everyday lives more generally, but more importantly, if all these projects, as far as I'm concerned, would have failed if they don't provide opportunities for local jobs. I think the pandemic, places like Oldham are really difficult in the sense that we have lots of potential sites that can be developed, but we really struggle with the viability of some of them and in getting wider interest. But ultimately, what I do hope is that it creates interest in significant development opportunities, but jobs for local people and apprentices.
Fantastic. And Lucy, that the Northern Routes project must be of interest to you. There was mention of biodiversity in there, which I know you have a specialist in, or certainly an interest in. What are your thoughts on that project, and do you think that can be translated across Greater Manchester?
I mean, Absolutely. I mean, it's such a fantastic sort of presentation to start with because, I mean, it's incredibly exciting, and actually a lot of the most exciting stuff that's going on in Greater Manchester at the moment is in these towns. It is things like what's happening at Oldham. It's a very kind of bold vision, and you see the thing, we heard a little bit about Stockport as well in the earlier panel, but a lot of that is about reopening the kind of Mersey, look at that Mersey corridor, treating kind of the green infrastructure foundations of these places in quite a different way. Because I think, just to kind of draw out a little bit in terms of the context for the development of these places, we have to remind ourselves of the context we're operating in. It's a very different context when we started the regeneration in the 1990s of the Manchester city centre. So we're operating in the context of a climate and ecological emergency, and I think that's not really leading these conversations and leading these debates enough. I would kind of take a little bit of an issue with what was talked about this morning in terms of continuity. I think what we need in the kind of town centres around Greater Manchester is a similar scale of ambition to what you had in Manchester city centre in the 1990s. We saw images of it, it took a great leap of imagination, great deal of ambition. But I think the values and the priorities and the policy landscape that's got to respond to are incredibly different. We're operating in an incredibly different place. And the climate emergency is not about a set of constraints. It's not about putting EV chargers in. It's actually about this level of vision, of starting from very different points, starting from green and blue infrastructure. 10, 20 years ago, what you'd have seen a sort of somewhere doing as a catalyst for regeneration of a centre would have been a shopping centre. You put a shopping centre in and you wait for things to happen. I think what Oldham's doing, but what we're seeing across a few of the other town centres, is a vision that starts from a very different place. I think it's the biggest kind of urban growing project in the UK. That's the kind of scale we need to be looking at, because also we're looking at this after COVID. We're also operating in a very different post-COVID world in terms of what people want, what's going to draw people back in. And landscape is a really important part of that. Landscape should be the starting point. Landscape-led design should be the starting point for this. And the buildings should fit around that, whereas I think what we've done previously in places, we started with the buildings and then retrofitted some of the GBI infrastructure around that. But this is exactly the kind of thing that we need to do. It's very difficult with the resourcing, which I'm sure we'll come on to, the strained resourcing of local authorities to lead these kind of visions. But it's absolutely vital and really, really exciting, exactly where I think we need to be.
Yeah, and Paul, from a developer's perspective, all that talk about sustainable development, how much of a consideration is that for you, and do you think developers in general are taking it as seriously as they should be at this stage? Because we are in a position where we're at the turning point, really.
Yeah, I think they are, most definitely. I think there's competing and conflicting reasons for that. Funding, the funding market, those that provide the infrastructure funding, require sustainability to be the focal point of a lot of the thinking from a development perspective. The requirements of, I suppose, us as a society, we're all now bought into it. We recognise the importance of dealing with it now. It does provide a challenge in terms of viability, but you get to the point where actually we need to create, and it was a question asked in one of the earlier panel about, are we future-proofing? I think we're trying to. I don't think we've got the right answer today. We're always learning. It's an evolving process. But it has to be, because it's an expectation, not just from ourselves as developers, but a requirement from funders, but also the end users of the building, be they residential or business occupiers. So it needs to be there.
Absolutely. And Dave, from a construction perspective, with developers and local authorities putting more of an emphasis on sustainability and greening, is that affecting how you can work, and in terms of margins as well? Are they factoring that into the construction contracts?
To some extent. I think the more mature thinking clients are definitely doing it. We get involved in both public and private sector development work, and we're fortunate that the routes to market for us involve us early in the process. So as far as viabilities are concerned, when people are putting appraisals together, we're able to offer them advice on what needs to be done and make sure that the solution that is being tabled is a deliverable solution as well, whether that be low-rise housing schemes in Warrington or some of the larger commercial developments in the city centre itself. So I think the market has matured around its thinking, and clients are particularly aware of the fact that there may be some capex output associated with sustainability. But what we're able to do now as a contractor, because we've developed our offering around it, is be able to provide whole life cycle costing advice, operating cost advice, so the long-term investment is realised. So yeah, we're seeing it mature, definitely the thinking around it, and we're putting a lot of investment as a contractor around our excellence centre in Coventry, in thinking of new ways to deliver sustainable technology in an affordable and effective way.
Absolutely. And Aidan, we'll come to you. You saw a presentation there of Oldham's ambitions. Wigan has its own, the Gallery Shopping Centre being one. But I'd like to talk to you first, before we go on to that, about the funding. You know, Arooj mentioned the town's funding. There's a lot of funds out there. Local authorities are under-resourced. How do you go about navigating that funding market in terms of the public sector and getting what you need?
Yeah, like you say, there is a lot of different funding elements, and what we do at Wigan is we try to focus our attentions onto the funding pots that are more closely aligned with the projects that we've got going on. The key things that we've been doing is looking at future high streets funding. That's been really fundamental in moving forward our project at the galleries. But not just that, we're also looking at levelling up. We've got a bid into round 1 for Wigan Town Centre, and we're likely to be working on projects for round 2 and some of the other town centres in the borough as well. So we don't go after all of the funding that's available. We focus that down and make sure that we've got a good chance of success, so that we balance that issue of not having unlimited resources to maximising the pots that are out there.
Excellent. And a very similar situation to Spindles in Oldham. Wigan bought the Gallery Shopping Centre, has gone out to developers, City Heart and BCGI won that contract. What's the reaction from the public been like to that scheme? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's involved.
Yeah, so very similar really. We bought the galleries a few years ago back from the private sector with the intention to actually address a lot of the issues around the retail sector. Similarly with Oldham, the pandemic hit, and that really had a more acute focus on what we needed to do to change the face of the town so that it really meets the needs of the occupiers and residents. We are looking at a new mixed-use scheme, really similar with a range of uses. It will have a retail focus to it, but it will be very much mixed use, so that it expands out into the leisure, residential, hotel, and other sectors, food and beverage as well, to really improve that offer. We're at the stage now where we're in for planning. It's due for a decision in November, where it will go through the committee. The reaction to the planning application, considering the scale of it, has been quite minimal. We've got less than 100 representations. That doesn't say it's without controversy. The development partner that was picked did create some issues because they're Chinese backed, and there was a reaction to that. There still is a bit of a reaction to it that is going through. There's noise, but I would say that noise, given the scale of what we're doing, is quite minimal, and hopefully won't cause us too many issues when we move through to planning committee.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because consultation now more than ever, because we can't meet in person, is very important. There's a real focus on consultation and involving the public. You are going to get some backlash. Arooj, have you found that this is the case in Oldham with Spindles? What's the reaction been like to that?
I think when we initially, we've been wanting to buy or have some influence over Spindles for years. The previous owners were Canadian, never here in Oldham, not invested in the borough at all, and we just kept seeing the closure of shops, and actually the public couldn't distinguish the fact that we had no ownership over it. Initially, when we were in talks with them, we were talking about £42 million, but then we managed to get it for 10.5. So that was another opportunity that the pandemic brought, because I think the owners just panicked and thought, oh my God, what is going to happen in the town? You know, so, but I think the initial thing for us has been, there has been some noise around it, but I understand that noise. So I keep saying to officers that, look, I may be leader of the council, but I'm chief resident. when I'm in this building, and I actually understand where the anxiety comes from, and it comes from when we keep announcing projects, shiny houses, shiny buildings, people can't identify how that is going to impact and improve their daily lives. They're not going to buy in on it. And consultation isn't a scary thing, but it has to be a meaningful thing. We have to take residents with us every step of the journey, and they have to understand what the potential is. And actually doing that, you do get the odd noise and the heckling and everything else, but ultimately, in my gut, it feels like the right thing to do. All I can do with the residents in Oldham is be open, honest and transparent, and I've done that. And with that, you either get people who like you or hate you, but I'm fine with that because at least people know what you stand for. So I just think I've had a really open conversation. Some people will be happy with it, some people won't. But I know, like you said earlier, you have to have the vision and the ambition. You know, whilst it doesn't address everything, the aspiration needs to be there, not just for us, but future generations. So I'm really relaxed in that way, to be honest.
Brilliant. It's quite the discount on the shopping centres.
Yeah, no, I really welcome one, actually.
It's impressive work. Lucy, I'll come to you. Obviously, we've got 2 town centre projects here that are at different stages. But in terms of climate resilience, which is something that we do have to think about going forward, perhaps you could give some practical examples to, you know, the 2 local authorities and everyone in the room who may not know what that term means, about how we can embed that in developments going forward and why it's important.
Yeah, I think you're right. It can be, this whole issue can be quite an overwhelming one. There's so many kind of parts to it. So we've got the kind of the mitigation side in terms of getting carbon emissions down, and a lot of that through placemaking. And then you've got the resilience side, because the reality is, you know, there was large parts of South Manchester evacuated when the Mersey, you know, overtopped last year. You know, it's already here. We've got to deal with things, particularly around flood resilience, but looking more forward around heating as well. And, you know, there are various things you can do, you know, on a site. Right? So I'm a strategic planner. You know, there's many things you can do on a site, and it's about good design and having a good landscape architect. I could point you to a couple. But, you know, it's more kind of strategic than that, and it's more about placemaking. So, for instance, you know, one of the things that we work a lot on is green and blue infrastructure work, both on the site level and on the strategic level. And getting a really good plan in place is important, because you cannot address these things site by site, because the fundamental thing about green and blue infrastructure is it's a network and it has to be linked together. And there was a bit of talk of connectivity this morning in Manchester City Centre, but that has to be the starting point for what you're doing. So there are various kind of features you can bring in, and sometimes in kind of dense areas and town centre regeneration, you're going to have to be quite creative about that and be really clever with your design around those constraints. So it's not just going to be you know, a load of houses and a bit of a park next to it. You know, you're going to have to look at different things, look at the maintenance costs. So street trees are important. The MPPF now means you have to put street trees in anyway. But you're looking at areas of wildflower. You're looking about where you can get linear rain gardens that would create simultaneously kind of flood resilience and biodiversity impact as well into those schemes. Looking at green roofs, green walls, which, you know, prove some kind of maintenance issues. But it's about a mosaic of features. It's not just about a bit of a park and a few trees. And, you know, the reason that I talk about this not being about constraints is because, you know, these make really, really good schemes that people really want to live in. You know, it comes back to the consultation side of things as well. There's a lot of assumptions about what people want to live in. If you go and ask them, I think you'll find they want to live in places with that park next to them. They want to live in places with green and blue infrastructure threaded through them. You know, what were people doing during COVID? They went out and they grew things in their allotments, right? You know, so this isn't, again, about constraints. It's more about the opportunities and really shaping places that people want to live in 2021 and 2022, not the kind of places that we made assumptions based on kind of quite 20th century models of where people wanted to live. And that means leading with, to use a kind of like jargon, you know, leading with the landscape, you know, which is what we talk about quite a lot in our schemes, both on a strategic level and on a site level.
Thank you very much. Dave, in terms of those elements that Lucy's mentioned there, it's important, isn't it, then, for construction companies to be engaged at an early stage, as early as possible. You know, we've heard this from construction companies over and over again. They want to be engaged early so that the risk is known and that they can iron out any problems at an early stage.
Yeah, I think there's multiple elements to it. Simon touched on it previously, actually, and as much as I'd want to disagree with his view around the self-delivery model, one of the benefits is the fact that there's a clear understanding of what the capital cost will be associated with delivering the aspirations of a sustainable development. And that's where we try to get involved early. We can provide real-time advice from the supply chain as to where things are, and also the latest technologies around it. But it's interesting, the piece, you know, we often focus on technical solutions around decarbonisation as building contractors, you know, introduction of air source heat pumps instead of boilers, etc. But the greening of spaces and taking that biodiverse piece, we're seeing a lot more nowadays. And again, I have to reflect a little bit on what Ian said earlier. Our concern, having been involved in that both regionally and nationally, is often the long-term maintenance is considered. And you know, there is an effort that is required to maintain these biodiverse spaces, and that's where the joined-up thinking needs to be. We can provide a limited amount of information on the original expenditure, but again, you end up having conversations about maintenance costs. So, look, it's a broader piece than building a piece of the built environment and then working your way around it nowadays. And the thinking is much greater. It's interesting, the Mayfield development at the moment is taking an approach, delivered somewhat by funding in the first instance, but they're going to green the space first, and then you'll see the master plan develop with residential and commercial. And I find that very interesting to see how that will move forward, because that's quite unusual. And again, you know, there's going to be the need for agencies such as the Environment Agency to step in there, ensure the Mersey is kept clean, and you know, there's maintenance done around it. So we're eager to see everybody come together, and there'll be some good solid policy thinking around it, so we can deliver these spaces for the long term.
Absolutely, well said. Paul, let's come on to Middlewood Locks, a very exciting project in Salford. It's moved on, you know, significantly over the last couple of years. Can you give us an update on where we're up to there, and also how you're factoring in these issues that have been raised around sustainability in terms of margins and the bottom line? How are you paying for it?
Yeah, so we're quite lucky at Middlewood Locks, and we have the BRE infrastructure which runs right through the heart of the scheme. And at the, I suppose when we sat down and looked at the master plan, the vision for what we were to create and what we wanted to create at Middlewood Locks, it was embracing that BRE infrastructure, building upon the need to have green space. You know, I've spoke about communities and how do you create a community. We don't create a community, people are the community. It's something that we can create the platform for, embrace and kind of push, but as people. And as part of the master plan, it is the creation of spaces and places where people can meet, interact, having different types of places and spaces, some hard, some green, and working with sensible landscape design at the heart of the master plan has been fundamental to the success at Middlewood Locks. You mentioned about the impact of COVID. I think in a lot of the stuff that we've done as part of the initial phases with that green corridor which surrounds the canal which runs through the centre of the site, we've seen our residents enjoy that space probably more because their lives weren't as busy, they were locked down, they had time to go and sit and have a cup of tea by the side of the canal in nice green, blue infrastructure. And then you touch upon sustainability, something that Ian touched upon. You know, sustainability isn't just the nature of the built form that comes out, it's the reuse of brownfield land. Middlewood Locks is a site that sat for 15 years probably before we really broke ground. It had went through various iterations of what it could and should be. Reacting, and I think what we have done, having delivered phases 1 and phases 2, is learn from the people that use the space. We engage with our residents there on a very frequent basis, asking them what they like and enjoy, and building upon that, making sure that each phase that comes next embraces that, takes it on board, betters it, and that helps solidify what we've done but builds upon to improve going forward.
And we've seen a lot of, I think, over 1,000 homes delivered so far. Plans recently submitted for the first commercial element. What's the thinking there? Is it 500,000 square foot of offices, more or less? Is the demand there?
Yeah, yes, I think the demand is there. I mean, we talk about Manchester, Salford as a city. It stands apart from any other regional city in terms of its resilience. I've got colleagues that live in the city, and when lockdown first happened, I think there was a view, and the city was effectively a ghost town, that, you know, going back to the smaller towns, commuter towns, would be where people would go to, and the city would suffer as a result. the reopening of the city has effectively reminded people of why they've come to Manchester or Salford in the first place, for that urban living. We've talked about, it's much spoke about the 15-minute city. Middlewood Locks as a community is 25 acres. We are giving 5 acres of that site to public realm. It's a major part, but within the confines of what we control, it's having that mix of uses. It's having that 24/7, so people living, working, enjoying the spaces, socialising there. So yeah, is the market? I think it is. We're seeing the government's commitment to levelling up, the desire to move, Whitehall from south to north. I think the northwest will benefit from a large drive of that move from south to north, and it's the affordability. We know that the north and the Northern Powerhouse, which is a developer we've fully bought into. It's affordability, but it's also lifestyle. It's the availability of talent. Manchester, Salford have got the benefit of 4 great universities. People come to study, but they stay. There's not the brain drain that there was 20 years ago. In fact, I think it's flipped the other way around. People are now wanting to come because people are making decisions based upon lifestyle. And I think Manchester, Salford offers a really competitive appeal to people that want to live within the city.
Absolutely. Aidan, Paul mentioned levelling up there, which is a term we've heard a lot about. How serious do you think the government actually is about that?
Well, they're making the right noises, is what I would probably say, and they are investing time, effort and money into making sure there's a strategy for it to happen. I think when you get into the more local politics behind it, it can get a bit more tricky. We have differences in terms of MPs and councils and political parties, and sometimes that causes conflict, particularly when you need to have MP support to make bids for money from the government. I think there's a lot going on. I think there's a good opportunity for the towns to really benefit from that. I think there could be more clarity, though, and more time given to be able to work up bids. We still haven't had any outcomes on the round ones yet, and there's no information in the public domain yet anyway around what round two is going to entail. So I think they're saying the right things, but they need to show a bit more action to make it happen on the ground.
Absolutely. Dave, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting for our business because we're sort of early benefactors of the levelling up to some extent, insofar as we've worked with the DFE for many years and we're involved in a number of frameworks, including the current MMC and high value framework. So our whole pipeline for the next 2 years is predominantly punctuated with the provision of education facilities in and around Greater Manchester. So we've got schools in Wigan, we've got schools in Rochdale, schools in Oldham, and that's continuing on. And so we can see that aspect of it around education, and also within that agenda there's a zero carbon and operation intent as well, which is great. But yes, it's localised, I don't disagree. It's particular to that particular aspect of delivery. Some of the other things that we're looking at around leisure and health are still not seeing the benefit yet. So yeah, we are early benefactors. It needs to get broader. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, watch this space in terms of levelling up. We'll go to some questions from the audience. This one at the top here from Lee from Corstorphine and Wright Architects. We did touch on this in terms of future maintenance of the climate resilience and all that kind of thing. So it's not always funding for greener development which is an issue, but many councils resist taking on liability for future maintenance. How can this be addressed? Arooj, is this something that you've thought about in terms of, Oldham wants to be the greenest borough, there's going to be a lot of maintenance there.
Yeah.
Is that factored into the...
It absolutely is in all the costings, because I think that's when I look at historically, Oldham and, I don't know, are the council officers, you're a council officer, don't take offence, but so basically council officers will always tell you where the cuts are, but they never tell you where the savings are. But what they fail to do, in my experience, is when they present a project or proposals, is to factor in the cost of maintenance, because that's really important. Don't do it if you're not going to take the liability of maintaining it. That's not for the residents or anybody else. So in all the projects that you saw today, that has been factored into the costings of it, and I think that's what we need to do. We saw that a lot during the pandemic as well. So sometimes we're blockers of our own destiny as local councils, and what we did do was we got rid of some of that through our procurement, through our social value avenues, and we made sure now, especially with these projects, that all the maintenance is costed in and it is seen as our responsibility, and everything that we're doing now is going to be for the next 5 to 10 years. So that has absolutely been in all of our budget settings. So yeah, absolutely, if you factor it in, then and know from the start that that's what you're going to commit to do, then yeah, it's fine.
Fantastic. Aidan, I feel like we should give you an opportunity to respond there. What are your thoughts on what Arooj?
I hope you don't know any officers in Oldham, by the way. So.
I'm new to Greater Manchester, so
great.
you're okay there.
Right.
I guess I come from it from a slightly different angle, really. I think when you're talking about a council-led project, I think very much so, yes, all of the maintenance costs is something that we work into our financials to make sure that it can be delivered and be maintained. What is more tricky for local authorities is when you've got a private scheme and you're getting all of those good pieces of infrastructure that was talked about earlier actually in the ground, which will really help with the sustainability of a scheme. But actually, how does that get maintained? Who pays for it? That's the bit which I think there could be more work done on. The thought is always the council will just maintain that. That actually costs more than our regular maintenance packages. So there's probably something that can be done, and it would take time on a per scheme basis, but work out where the benefits are, where the longer term cost savings to the council will be, for example, less flood risk costs in the future and things like that, and actually work that into how it can be funded with a longer term solution. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that's probably where we need to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. There's a nice general question here, which I think we'll put to you, Lucy. What are the biggest challenges, it may not be appearing on the screen, but what are the biggest challenges facing northern towns, so specifically Greater Manchester in this instance, in terms of development, do you think? What are the biggest challenges?
In terms of development in general? I mean, there are various, I think, you could look at various components. I'd sort of echo this whole conversation that's been going on around maintenance, just first of all, because certainly when we're looking at the green and blue elements and working with local authorities, the discussion around the capital for these things is difficult. The discussion around maintenance is more difficult. I think there's no silver bullet answer. I think, all you can do is start this at the very first conversation on any project needs to be taking maintenance into account, because these different elements, they have very different maintenance requirements. So really, again, starting with that, designing that in is one way forward. It doesn't resolve the entire problem. But it's also around, this question of value. So, in Greater Manchester, we've got quite a pioneering sort of natural capital investment plan, which is looking into these models of how do we value these things, and that's got a lot of maintenance implications as well, in terms of how we value these things in the long term and how we place different values on this. But I think, I think just moving on slightly from that is, it is this question around resourcing. When we're sort of when sort of on a strategic level, you're setting out a vision for these places, planners, and I'm coming at this very much from a planning perspective, need to be freed up from this and given the resources and an upskilling to really demand really good design and really understand really good design. There's a lot being asked of them by the kind of currently very woolly kind of planning reforms around design coding. Great idea. There's absolutely nowhere near the capacity to be able to do those things. But if you get really good design coding in place, it doesn't resolve the whole problem, but the sustainability comes into that, and net zero comes into that quite a lot. But it provides that certainty for development schemes. What do you want us to provide? Everyone wins from that, but it really needs resourcing within the local authorities. And at the moment, everything that local authorities are having to worry about is about numbers and targets, right? We don't become planners to look at a spreadsheet of numbers and housing targets. We could become accountants. Planners are also, there is that's an important part of it, but it needs to be balanced with a vision of a new place. And to be honest, it's almost impossible for, I mean, we're seeing some brilliant things coming out of these towns, which is really impressive, particularly because the resourcing constraints and what's being asked of local authorities and local planning departments is impossible based on current resourcing. So that, for me, is another key barrier to this.
Absolutely, fantastic. Paul, we've spoken about challenges there, towns in Greater Manchester. What about the opportunities? As a developer, what do you see as the areas of opportunity in Greater Manchester currently?
I think what we're seeing with the Greater Manchester councils generally is an acknowledgement that actually in the towns outside of the city centre that they need to play a real active role in be the catalyst for that regeneration, but also recognition that no town centre they need to be relevant. Oldham's different to Wigan, different to Bolton, etc., etc. And it's that point of difference that sits within each local authority, a reason for being. A lot of development, you talked about chuck a shopping centre up and then let's see what happens around it. I think the proactive approach that local authorities are now taking, controlling their own destiny, creating a place for their people. I mean, the thing that has come through the earlier panel, but also today, is the importance of people and providing a place for them, a place for their futures, not just today, and we'll see what comes. It's forward-thinking planning. And I think that's where the opportunity is to work collaboratively in partnership to deliver something that's right for the people of Oldham, the people of Wigan, the people of Manchester, Salford. That's a real opportunity. And having forward-thinking, proactive local authority leadership to drive that agenda. You know, Greater Manchester, combined authorities, 10 authorities working together. There's obviously going to be conflict and competition. There has to be. But there's also the importance to recognise the identity and relevance within each local authority. And if we get that right, then actually they become complementary to each other rather than conflicting and competing against each other. And that's a real opportunity which we need to embrace across.
It's probably easier now that Richard Lees is standing down. You'll find it like there's opportunities for us all now. But I do really agree with what you've said there. But I think there's also about the rest of the combined authorities, the rest of the local districts need to stop competing. So for me, since May, I only became leader in May. I don't think I'm in competition with Manchester or Salford, because we're never going to be that. We're never going to be on that scale. But actually, we have huge opportunities because we're in the middle of Manchester and the Peak District, which is an opportunity in itself. But we have great connectivity and transport links to anywhere you want to go. So I think it's about owning exactly what you have and maximising on that instead of thinking that you have to compete with other districts.
And I think that's a relatively recent recognition. And it's not just in Greater Manchester. We're talking to local authorities across the country where the driver, the focus is to create a place for their people. You know, focus on what's good about Oldham, what's good about Wigan, what's good about all of these other towns, because you're never going to be at Manchester. So let's not compete. The high street, what's been the impact on the high street? It's a lot of high streets are an identikit. You can walk down two towns, two cities, and they look exactly the same. We're trying to, within our schemes, is have that identity, that relevance, a point of difference. Why do people want to come to Middlebury Locks to live, to work? Why do people want to come to our other schemes to be part of that community, be it business-led, be it residential-led? And it's just being relevant for your market, reflecting your heritage, your culture. It's hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. We've spoken about identikit towns, you know, everywhere was based around a big shopping centre previously. This is obviously out of date, and this is why we're seeing the push for regeneration. But when I speak to local authorities and developers taking on these town centre regeneration projects, I hear the same things. So a cinema, independent retailers, some homes, a park. Are we not going to go back to that identikit town centres? And, you know, the point about relevance and identity is a very important one, but are we actually missing the point? Aidan, from Paul, one.
Yeah, well, we've sat with a lot of authorities and they've pointed to a successful example. Can we have, or wouldn't it be good to have? Well, you can have a version of that, and I think it's not an identikit. It's a version. It's learning from the successes of others, building upon those, but making them fit that specific authority or the need in that town. Because the needs in each individual town are different, because the infrastructure is different, connectivity is different, culture is different. So there will be a vein of consistency, but it's I suppose the nuance around the edge that makes it relevant and not just a replication.
Yeah. Aidan, what are your thoughts on that? How are you making the galleries redevelopment relevant and with a Wigan identity?
Yeah, well, we're doing a few things in the town centre, so it isn't just the galleries project coming forward, and we do have another shopping centre which has that more faceless identity, if you were, all of the chains within it. What we're looking at in the galleries project is not just recreating that retail provision, but actually making sure that it's fit for purpose for the residents. So it's going to link into the bus station, which has recently been completed across the road. It's going to have a market which brings the existing indoor market with it. So really having that cultural identity of Wigan at the heart of the new centre itself. But outside and a bit wider in the town centre, we're doing more. We've got King Street, which is a heritage action zone, which is going to be our nighttime economy. So really trying to pull that forward, and we're giving grants out to improve the theatre there, which is going to open in a couple of years' time. Work's underway at the moment. And we're also heavily invested in Wigan Pier as well. It's been closed for a long time. It used to be a thriving part of the town centre. It isn't at the moment. We're just going into funding the fit out of the buildings there, and that's going to create a cultural heart for the town centre as well. So it's about making sure we bring our identity of Wigan to what we're doing, rather than it just being another town.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll go to another question from the audience. I think Carrie wins Slido today. Great question in the first panel, and another one here that's been upvoted. Dave, we'll aim this one at you. How is the aspiration for net zero carbon environments impacting the sector, and what part do modern methods of construction have to play in achieving that role?
I think the first thing is it's challenged certainly the contracting side of things and the consultants and our design partners to think more around it. My experience probably is over 10-15 years with this, where when we first started, the reality is it felt a bit tokenist. It was, you know, we'll put a biomass boiler in or something like that. We'll start to attack it in such a way that we're maximising our BREEAM points. CHP, was that really the way forward? All these questions came out, but now we're in a situation where I think there's a lot more developed thinking, and as I say, it on scale it can apply anywhere. So we're developing low-rise housing solutions in and around Warrington, and we're on site now, and we've put ground source heat pumps in, you know, and there's not a particularly high density of units on there, but the investment is understood and the return is understood, so there's a willingness to make that investment. And then you go to the larger scale projects where, you know, obviously major commercial developments can start looking at not just sustainability but well-being and the neighbours ratings and challenging thinking around that, EPCA plus. So what it's required us to do, particularly, well, the industry generally, but particularly at Waits, is to look at how we embrace modern methods of construction, how we embrace new technologies. There's no one size fits all. That's what we've come to the conclusion. We don't specialise in modular construction where you take a prefabricated solution and then place it on site. We do get involved in it, but we almost act as an enabler for pre-assembled solutions. So we do have our own self-delivery arm around building services at Prism, where we do horizontal, vertical service distribution, plant rooms and the usual things. But we're now working more closely with the supply chain to actually challenge traditional means of construction and say, can we do this in a pre-assembled way? And that, in many ways, is what we've seen around the MMC offering with the new schools that we're looking at the moment. We've took an existing design intent, our Adapt 2, which is quite efficient education design, and we said, right, how do we move this on? And we've set KPI targets by the DFE of developing a solution that had a pre-manufactured value of 70%. And they said, right, well, you know, where do we start with this? We aren't going to become wedded to one product because, particularly in the current climate, that's quite a dangerous thing to do from a commercial perspective. So we've worked with a number of partners to create a broad offering, and over time we'll end up with a kit of parts that responds to the needs of that particular project as it develops. And we'll continue learning. That's the reality of it. At the moment, you know, when you look at the skills shortages that we've got, certainly locally, because of the supply and demand issues we have, MMC is a solution, but I don't disagree what was mentioned by the panels previously. There'll always be a place for traditional construction as well in my mind, so it's never a one-size-fits-all.
Fantastic, thank you. Arooj, there's a question here from the audience about Oldham that I'd like to ask you. Public-private partnerships are key to secure delivery. We're seeing that in Wigan, and you're going out to tender on spindles. What initiatives are available from Oldham Council to secure developer investment with low GDVs?
With what, sorry?
Low
sorry.
gross development values.
I'm
How
not-
are you going to attract developers to invest in this project when the returns are not as high as they would be in Manchester, for example?
I think flexible procurement is one thing, because what I've heard continuously from developers is that our procurement process, like you could almost die a death before you reach the end of it. So I'm thinking flexibility in that, because we did do that during the pandemic using delegated power. So I'm hoping that will be a factor. And also, I think just that really.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if I didn't answer that properly.
Fine.
It's a bit...
Paul, from a developer's perspective then, what would entice you into a town centre, when the returns are not necessarily as high as in cities?
I suppose ultimately, from a private sector perspective, it needs to be viable. It's the recognition that we're seeing across the UK with smaller towns that the local authorities need to play a part in acting as the catalyst to the first and then the fulcrum that sits around the spread of regeneration, and that's what it is. It's being a partner with the local authority, them sharing the local authority's ability to draw down funding from central government sources surpasses the private sector, but is bringing the private sector expertise to deliver things efficiently, expediently, that helps create it. And it's working with forward-thinking, proactive partners that realise they have to play an active role in bringing forward the regeneration of their town or city.
Absolutely. One thing we have to mention during the Greater Manchester update is transport. I was speaking with Ian earlier. He was of the opinion that build these developments, people will come, and then the infrastructure might have to come later. I wonder what the panel's view on this is. Lucy, how well is Greater Manchester's transport network holding up with the changing of society?
Well, I think that the infrastructure needs to be there first, really. So I'm not a transport planner. I don't know if there's any transport planners on the panel, but unless we get the transport planning right first, we can't do a good placemaking job, right? And that's going to involve a lot of really kind of difficult political decisions. I find it quite interesting with the towns we're talking about today. They're often referred to as the M60 towns, which have a big issue with, because that's sort of part of the problem, isn't it, really? They're the Metrolink towns, they're whatever you want to call them, but they're not the M60 towns, because we have to get away from that kind of thinking. And obviously there are good things going on in terms of cycle infrastructure, a lot more going on in Greater Manchester than a lot of other city regions in terms of Andy Burnham and Chris Boardman's vision for B-lines. They sort of need to surface them properly and get them going, but it's a good starting point. But I think again, this isn't an area I'm particularly involved in, but I think what's really key is it's about that sort of idea of whether these towns are in competition with each other. And I think linking those places together, it's fantastic they're linked to the centre via the Metrolink, but better links, orbital links basically between these places. So if there's a fantastic food market being built in kind of Oldham and you want to go for that, but you're in Bury, you don't have to go through the city centre. And there are, I know TFGM do talk about this. It's quite ambitious, it's quite technically challenging, but that's probably the kind of level of ambition we need. We probably need more orbital routes that don't just go in and out of the city centre. I think, just picking up on some things that were said before, I think the polycentric nature of Greater Manchester is an asset. It's not a problem. It's not everyone competing with each other. You're always going to have certain city centre uses that people are going to come in for, but you're also going to have really exciting things happening, whether it's around food markets or cultural events or access to the Pennines and what have you in these places. But the transport network, I think, has to probably become less radial and obviously just really serious road space reallocation towards walking and cycling, which is politically very difficult, really requires really bold political decisions, but it's a key part of placemaking. We've got to get the streets back so that we can make the streets into places, because without that nothing else really works. you know.
Absolutely. Aidan, transport in Wigan not connected by the Metrolink, is that something that the council is thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, the Metrolink is really key. It really helps improve and drive that culture shift and get people out their cars. We do have long-term held ambitions, and we work really collectively with the Combined Authority and TfGM to see about how we can extend the Eccles line up into Atherton. Probably wouldn't ever come as far as Wigan, but Wigan has got 2 train stations. It's quite well connected to the city centre for those radial connections when they're needed. We're also looking at really building on the work that we've already started on the B network. We've got about 5 sites, schemes on site at the moment, and that's about improving and creating that channel shift away from the private car. And like you say, it's not always popular, but we've made those decisions and we're moving forward with it. And they're also going to form really key parts of our town centre regeneration strategies that we have both in Wigan and Lee to really just try and change that sea of car parking into much better, greener spaces which will work for the community better.
Yeah, certainly, hopefully one to watch going forward across Greater Manchester, you know, what happens to the car parks.
Yeah, and mobility hubs are the other thing which is really key across the whole of Greater Manchester. There's the flagship one coming on board in Ancoats. We're looking at our own smaller scheme within Lee, and I know that there's a huge focus on that, and that's really going to change not just the way people move, but also how, say, last mile deliveries are done, so you don't have Amazon cars everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So, Lucy, do you want to come in on the mobility hubs?
I just forgot to mention the buses. The buses is like a huge thing. Like buses, traditionally, they're not very sexy. The Metrolink's like a bit sexy now. People like the Metrolink, but the buses and the sort of re-regulation of the buses and bringing that back in-house is enormous. You know, only London and Nottingham have that. You know, if you look at the London public transport system, yes, it's very well funded, but partly it's just how it's run. And obviously we've not been able to do that until legislation changed in 2017. And being the first city region to do that is a huge thing. You know, if you can switch between, you know, whatever they'll call it, your B card or whatever they end up calling it, from Metrolink to buses, it just starts to link everything up again. That's something that really helps combat it just being about radial links. You know, and that's a huge game changer. When we were talking about kind of Andy Burnham's role in Greater Manchester earlier, I think I've seen an interview with him saying his only role really is to bring the buses back in-house. You know, that's the most important thing he's done, you know, potentially. It's incredibly important and quite overlooked. Buses are really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Paul, we'll finish with you. There's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, but there's been a lot of positivity on both panels today. Looking ahead, what's over the horizon for Greater Manchester's development community? How would you tell them to feel going forward?
Uncertainty, I think there's been a period of uncertainty probably from 2016, from the Brexit vote and what's coming. So, you know, almost uncertainty seems normal to a degree now. I think we've shown in Greater Manchester a great resilience, a great ambition, a drive to move things forward. I think the local authorities outside of the city centre taking up the cudgel and promoting that and bringing it forward should give us all cause for optimism. You know, we've got a shared ambition to make the place better. Putting people at the heart of what we do, I think, is key, because that will drive us to make better decisions and create a sustainable longer-term future for the regeneration of the respective towns, cities that we all live in, work and operate within.
Fantastic, thank you very much. That's all we've got time for today, I'm afraid. Please, a round of applause for Paul, Lucy, Arooj, Aidan and Dave. Okay, thank you very much to all of you. Fascinating discussion and lots to keep our eye on going forward. Thanks to you all as well for coming today. It's been fantastic having so many people here in the room and enjoying and engaging and talking. It's a real breath of fresh air. If you want to do it again, we have another event next week here on Thursday, Place Resi. So you can book your tickets by visiting placenorthwest.co.uk. So please do that. We'd love to see you there. That's all we've got time for. It is time for lunch now, so please stick around if you can, have a chat, enjoy some more networking. But once again, thank you very much and see you next time.